Hello listeners, and welcome to the Plastic Fantastic podcast, brought to you by Mr. Adrian Richards and myself, Alison Telfer. Now, what's this all about? Well, I can't work out if Adrian and I have simply tried to go on a journey to find out who is the best person to give me a facelift, the best person to deliver a hair transplant, the best person to do a non-surgical rhinoplasty, or the best person to advise us on our business. Yep, that's what this podcast is all about. Adrian and I are bringing to you the UK's first podcast marrying surgical, non-surgical and everything in between. So welcome to Plastic Fantastic. We hope you enjoy the journey, enjoy the guests and enjoy everything about what's great in plastic surgery and what's fantastic in non-surgical.
Hello, welcome to the Plastic Fantastic podcast. I'm Adrian Richards and
I'm Alison Telfer, who's going to be co-hosting this fantastic podcast with Adrian.
Yeah, and Al, you came up with the name, so tell us why the name.
Well, because we wanted it to be catchy, and you know, Plastic Fantastic is something that people use. People associate it with plastic surgery, and also we only want to interview the fantastic. So for our podcast, it's going to be all about plastics, non-surgical, but by the fantastic.
Okay, and what do you have to do to qualify as fantastic?
You have to be really good at what you do, and you have to be really entertaining. And also, you have to have either work in the industry, have an opinion on the industry, have been touched by the industry. So essentially, you've got something to add to the industry.
Yeah, so it will be, people who work in the industry, so doctors, nurses, dentists, whatever. It will be people who've had treatments, and it will be people who work as auxiliary people in the industry.
Yeah, so, it might be a motivational speaker from New York. It might be a patient who's had a good experience or a bad experience, or it might be your top surgeon in whatever. So it'll just be bringing the most interesting people and making them accessible.
Yeah, and we've got a top list of guests, so we're not going to go into them too much now, but we've got a variety and 100% interesting guests. So I thought what we'd do first off, Al, is before we interview basically anyone else, let's just get down to basics with ourselves, because I sort of know you a little bit, but I don't know you brilliantly.
No,
we've met at a few conferences. So how many times have we met in person, would you say, Al?
I don't know, but I mean, we first met about 12 years ago, I think, at an awards thing, which is quite interesting because you quite often seem to be at awards things. But I would say probably a couple of times a year. But we've always shared alignment, I think, when it comes to the industry and what we think and feel about it.
Yeah, so when I met you, I basically realised there was someone who sort of thought along the same lines as me. I think that was fairly true. So that's why we've chosen to do the podcast together. Now, a little bit about you, Al. So we're going to get down into your background. So you were born in Australia to a father who was a doodle bugger. What is a doodle bugger?
So my father was a rancher. So he was a rancher. So he would move cattle across the big lands in Australia. And also he would work in the mines or oil industry. He left school at 12. He wasn't a super educated man. So he was what's called a doodle bugger, because they would just doodle around and bugger about everything, essentially. It's just a very Australian term. Yeah,
and he was Australian, was he? He wasn't an immigrant?
No, he was a roughy-tufty, fully born Australian from the outback.
And where did he live in Oz? Where were you brought up?
So we were in Queensland, right sort of in the middle of, in the boondocks, we call it, in the middle of nowhere. And he was married to my mother, who was this very sort of quintessentially English woman who was sort of part of the Mothers Guild and all of that kind of thing. So it was a bit of a contrast in coming together.
Yeah. And who are you more like, Al?
My dad. I'm really like my dad. And my dad, I think a lot of us have this. My father had a massive influence on the way I've gone forward in my career and all of those kind of things, and my belief and that. So I think it's the same. But you've had an interesting upbringing as well, though, Adrian, if I'm right.
Yes. So I was born, my grandfather worked in Cadbury's in Bourneville, where Bourneville. Yeah. So basically Bourneville is a little town that Cadbury's made outside Birmingham. which was supposed to be, because the idea of chocolate, like the Roundtree family as well, is to stop people drinking.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the idea, they were Quakers, and the idea was they were anti-drinking, so chocolate would take over from drinking. So he worked in Bourneville all his life. He cycled there from where he lived in Quinton, and he got to be the chief chocolate mixer of Cadbury's. And when we were young, he used to go to the second shop in Bourneville. And I cannot eat cream eggs anymore.
Because you had too many.
I had too many. I cannot go near a cream egg anymore.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, so that was him. And then my dad was a doctor, and he worked in the pharmaceutical industry and now lives in America, which I'll go into later. So then your family, did your mum and dad get together after 10 days, did you say?
Yeah, so it is an interesting story. I'll tell it in a sort of whistle stop. My mother was a nurse at Barts Hospital, and really bizarrely, when I went to Barts Hospital to work many years later, we ended up living in the same nurses' accommodation. I lived where she had lived, sort of however many years previously. My dad was over from Australia, and he was visiting, and his friend in Earl's Court said, ring up this nursing home, sort of where the nurses live. One of the women will take you out and show you London. But don't go out with Sheila because she's engaged. So anyway, my dad rings up and says, can someone take me around London? And my mum had just finished a week of nights. So she said, yes, of course. And my dad said, I'll pick up the bill. It'd be great. So they had this week in London, although my mum was Sheila. She was the one who was engaged, and she was Sheila. Anyway, they had this week. My dad went back to Australia. My mum realised she couldn't marry the surgeon that she was engaged to.
Yeah.
And then my dad reappeared 6 weeks later. They wrote a couple of letters. 6 weeks later, came back and said, I haven't got long, but if you want, let's get married. And then we got to go. So they got married and they moved to Australia.
Did he come back all the way from Australia for her?
To get my mum. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
To get my mum.
And was it a romantic, did the romance last?
No. It did. They lasted 35 years. Years, but I think that's mostly because my father lived in a different country most of the time.
Oh, right. So is that because you went to Malta?
Yeah, because my dad worked in the oil and water industry eventually. So we were always traveling. So, I didn't really settle in the UK. I settled for portions, but then we lived out in Sudan when Sharia law was being introduced. My mother didn't like that very much, so she moved back to England and left me there. My dad wanted me to learn Arabic, so they put me in an Arabic school so that I could learn Arabic. And then we just travelled around, and I eventually came back to the UK to do sort of the end of my GCSEs and A-levels.
So from age of 16, you've been in the UK?
Yeah, permanently, yeah.
And where did you do your A-levels? GCSEs.
So I did my GCSEs at a school in Cambridgeshire called Kimbolton Castle. It's a beautiful school. And then I didn't do so well, so I had to leave that school, and I went.
What happened? Let's go back. What happened there?
Do you know what? I fluffed it. I really fluffed it. All I want to do is spend my time smoking cigarettes and kissing boys. So I didn't do very well. So the school didn't welcome me back.
Oh dear.
So I then had to go to a sixth form college to do a bit of resitting.
Yeah. And then went to nursing in Barts, like your mum.
Yeah, and that's how I ended up in nursing, because I fluffed everything. I really wanted to probably do medicine, but I just fluffed it. And so my mum said, just go and be a nurse, you'll be good. And do you know what? I'd had a paper round since I was 12. I used to work in the fish and chip shop. I just wanted to work. I didn't want to be in school.
Yeah.
So
brilliant.
So Adrian, so that
we got to Birmingham, yeah.
You got to Birmingham. So that was so you started life in Birmingham?
No. So then my mum and dad met at medical school. So my mum was a doctor, my dad was a doctor. They met in Birmingham medical school. My mum was very strong-willed, and was one of the only women in medical school. Yeah. Really? Yeah.
Because back then women just
didn't go. There were very few people going. So they got together, but in those days, you had to get married, as you understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. and they got married quickly, and they were both very strong personalities. He was a registrar, she was I think a junior doctor, and basically he was working really hard. She was very very strong woman, and the story goes that he was working a morning shift doing a registrar medical on call take. She went to a house auction in this massive old people's home. When he finished his morning shift, he went to the auction and said, "How are you getting on, darling? Bought anything?" And she said, what did she say, Al? "I bought the house."
No.
So she basically bought the nursing home. So we lived in this old nursing home. We had a room full of mattresses, which we just played in, and it was great for us as kids because there's 4 of us, my sister and 3 brothers. We loved it, but I think it caused quite a lot of strain in the relationship.
The residents weren't still in the nursing home.
No, the beds were still warm. And anyway, so they sort of split up then because obviously, a lot of stress, for young children, all born within 5 years, a nursing home to look after, and so he basically worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and they split up, and then he moved to America. He moved to Philadelphia.
Oh, okay, gosh. So when you were young, he went to America.
When I was 6, he moved. Yeah, they split up and he moved. And then the next stage was I was happy at school. I was very posh. We got recordings from me when I was young. We were really like Little Lord Fauntleroy. And my mum died when I was 12. And then we were fostered or sort of adopted by another family who basically had 4 children as well, who were sort of friends of my dad, but not. I didn't really know them, but anyway, so we went to live with them, and from Lord Fauntleroy, they were the most bohemian people you've ever seen in your life. Lived in a massive house in Maidenhead, actors. It was. I went from very regimented to completely.
Yeah. And how old were you then? Were you 12?
12, yeah. And that was, so my life made an absolute sideways turn. And so I call them my brothers and sisters now.
Right.
So they live in England, 4 of them.
Yeah.
So they're my English brothers and sisters. And I've got American real siblings who all live in Philadelphia and Detroit and things. And since then, my dad got remarried again, and I've got a half brother who is a hotshot lawyer in Manhattan, 27. Like Harvey on Suits.
Yeah. So your father, there was no consideration of you moving to America to go to your father at that point?
Well, I had a choice. I had a choice of stay in England with all my new family, the bohemian new ones, or move to America.
Yeah.
So I chose to stay with the Bohemians and go to school at Bradfield with my foster brothers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas all the rest of my family, brothers and sisters, moved to America because I was the oldest, so I stayed. They went.
I see. So you were the only one that stayed?
Yeah, my sister stayed for a bit, but then she went. So they all live there now. That's the connection, you see.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, I did wonder where there was that connection.
Yeah, and now my dad has married a 3rd time as well. So he's now married a lady who's very interesting, who is in her 80s now, but she's lived a brilliant life. She, have you ever watched Mad Men?
No, I haven't. But...
Well, you should watch Mad Men. But in the 60s and 70s, she was cavorting around with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. Yeah, and she's 82 now, but she can tell a story. I'll tell you, Nancy.
Do you know what though? I've always been led to believe you can't get married 3 times because because the first time you can blame it on the other person. You can say, "Oh, they were wrong."
Yeah.
If you get divorced a second time, there's only one common denominator in it now, and that's you. So I think you can only get divorced once. You can only remarry. You can only marry twice. That's what a brilliant American patient of mine told me.
But what happens if they both die? As in my dad's case.
Fine. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that's okay, is it?
That's okay.
I noticed your book on the perfect wife there. So you're never going to get divorced. You're the perfect wife.
No, I don't know, I haven't read it yet, because the next one that's along it says The Rules of Life. Maybe I should read that one first.
Yeah. So anyway, back to you, Al. So you did your secondary school. You didn't do so well because you were focused on other issues. Then you moved to the Sudan. You haven't talked about that yet.
Oh yeah, that was when I was a teenager. So when my father worked on the Bob Geldof project for water for refugees in Ethiopia. So we, back then, I mean, it's crazy, isn't it, when you think about it? It was very important. I have a brother who's slightly older than me, and it was very important that his education remained stable. So he was sent to boarding school here in England, and I was taken to Sudan to live with my mother and father. My father was an amazing man, and he spoke fluent Arabic because he'd always worked in sort of these different countries, and he decided that he wanted me to speak fluent Arabic. And so the way to do it was to put me into a Sudanese school. So we moved out to Sudan. I went to this Sudanese school, and this really is what contributed to me not doing brilliantly when I returned to the UK, because I couldn't learn anything. I didn't understand anything. I couldn't learn anything, so, but it was an amazing experience. We had 2 gazelle that lived in the house. We had a chameleon. Our dog died. I had to wrap it in a silk blanket and bury it in the desert so that no one ate it. I mean, it was on a Friday. If you drove a certain way around the prison from school when my dad would collect me, you could see the hanging. If you stood enough, you could stood on the side of the car, you could look over the walls and see the hangings. I mean, it was a brutal time out there, but it was an amazing experience. And I think this is what's really helped shape my further career then, is that I've seen and done and been to lots of different things that I believe that you can achieve most things. So, which I think has helped going forward.
Yeah. So you've got that sort of mindset that there's no limitations. You don't. Yeah. You think you can do anything, don't you?
Yeah. And I think that comes though from my father used to say, if there was something like really difficult to do, my father would say to me, "You are big enough and ugly enough to do it." So, so it's just kind of one of those things. Yeah. So that's kind of where I went from there and that.
Yeah. Okay. So Sudan, then you did your A levels, and then you went into nursing at Bob. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So then I went off to do nursing. I realized I was in nursing, and I realized actually it was right. It was working with people. I loved it. I used to annoy the ward sisters and things. I used to whistle, I remember, bizarrely. And I remember the ward sisters would say to me, "There's nothing worse than a whistling woman and a crowing hen." Or the other one, because I can talk quite a bit, is they would say, "Empty vessels make the most noise." I know. So I went off to Barts and realised that nursing, I was good at it. And really bizarrely, I became the youngest sister ever at Barts Hospital.
So, well done you. That's a claim to fame, isn't it? What were you a sister in? Were you in the Douglas Bader amputation unit?
No, so when I first qualified, I worked in the amputation unit, and then that was at Roehampton, and then when I went to Barts, I was a urology sister. Yeah. So all things to do with men's health.
Good. And people won't know who Douglas Bader was.
No, so Douglas Bader was a war veteran who lost his legs basically, and then the Douglas Bader unit was amazing. We would accept people, and part of the mission about people coming in there, it was with amputations. It could be traumatic amputations through meningococcal septicemia, something like that. But the remit was they had to walk out 6 weeks later.
Because that's what he did. He lost his legs, but he went back to flying, didn't he?
Yeah. So, and that was it. So that was the mantra. So we had some really fascinating, we had people being blown up with landmines in Mozambique. We had young teenagers who'd lost it through disease. So it was an amazing place to work.
Well, that sounds brilliant. Okay. So then youngest sister at Barts. Tell me your secret at a 50th. Tell the story of your secret at a 50th.
So I went to this fantastic 50th a few years ago in one of these very fancy, I think it was at the Dorchester, and it was 25 women. It was very smart, and we were
just
having
women.
Amazing,
just women.
It was just it was a girlfriend, just women, and we were having this very smart dinner. And then she was having a separate party, but she just wanted to bring her girlfriend together. And so what we decided to do, which would be fun, was you had to write something about you that no one else knew and send it to her. And then at the party, she read them all out while we were having dinner, and you had to guess what was what. So because when I was working at Bart's, an element of my job was working in the erectile dysfunction clinic. So my secret was, when I left university, I would spend my time helping men get hard to make ends meet.
Really? Yeah. Yeah.
And so everyone in this room goes, oh my God, there's a hooker in the room. One of these girls is a hooker. You know, we're all sitting there in our finery, and obviously it wasn't. It was just a play on words from me being a nurse in urology.
Yes. Very good. So that was your early career.
That was my early career. Yes. So Adrian, so secondary school at Bradford. Were you a boarder? Bradfield. Were you a boarder?
Yeah. Yes, I was. I was in Sea House with my two brothers. And funnily enough, we had a guy there called Anton Bilton, who was in my house. I knew him really well. And he's a really good friend of ours. And he has now become one of the most eligible and wealthy men about town in West London.
Really?
Because his grandfather was called Percy Bilton, and he had lots of property. And Anton, you know, he was really nice, Anton, he's a lovely person. But, you know, after, you know, he'd been away for the weekend, we'd say, what did you do, Anton? He goes, oh, I shot my first stag, or I've been to a point-to-point, been blooded. God. You know, when you shoot your first stag, you're blooded. And so I didn't know what a point-to-point was. Do you know what a point-to-point is?
It's race meat.
Yeah, I thought it was just they race from a point, but it's a proper anyway.
Yeah.
So he was lovely, but obviously when you leave school, you don't see each other again. And he always promised, when he inherited, to buy myself and my brothers a Mini. And we have not seen Anton Bilton. So I see him.
I'd remind him.
Yeah, well, I don't contact him anymore because I lost his contact details. But I see him in all the glossy magazines, and you know, and I think he's married an ex-model. So Anton, if you're watching, please get in contact. I need that Mini. I want that Mini. Yes, I went to school there. Before that, I went to Africa. I didn't tell you that, did I? So after I finished school, I took a year out. Actually, because my mum had died and left me a bit of money, and I went to the big fancy lawyer in Lincoln's Inn Fields, me and my sister. So on the way there, I got my face caught in the underground because she was taking so long to get out, my sister, and it closed. So I had these black marks. I didn't know I had these black marks like American football. No. Yeah, I went to see I looked down and could see the guard, and he let me out. Anyway, so then I went into the very posh Lincoln's Inn Field. And the lawyer said, well, you've got this inheritance for your mother. You know, we've invested it in shares. You're 18, and we suggest you keep it in there, and you will grow a portfolio. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, how much money is it? And they told me. And I said, what are my options? And they said, well, obviously, we advise you a portfolio. I said, any other options? And they said, well, you can sign here and get all the money now.
And is that what you did?
So I did, yeah. So then I went off initially to Sri Lanka. I was a housemaster in school in a place called Nureli. You ever been to Sri Lanka?
No, I haven't been to Sri Lanka, no.
Well, Nureli is in the tea plantations. So basically, when it was hot in the old days, all the colonials used to go up into tea plantations. They were cooler. And Nureli is like Little England up in the mountains, in tea plantations. So I was a schoolmaster for 6 months. And then I came back, and then I went on a truck, one of these, from London to South Africa. So we went overland it was Congo then, through the Sahara, through the Congo.
Wow.
And camped out every night. And again, so I spent 6 months with 18 people from then, and I'm just lost contact with them. So if any of you are out there, Hamilton in particular, you'd love to hear from you again. It was amazing. So I love Africa as well, just like you will.
Amazing. That's amazing. Anyway, yeah. And then what made you want to be a doctor? Was it because your parents?
Just because my mum and dad did it. I couldn't think of anything else to do. Yeah.
That's reassuring for patients.
Yeah. And I don't think I was a very good doctor, actually, really. Not initially, because you know about doctoring. It's So plastic surgery is not like your average doctoring.
No.
Why isn't it like your average doctoring, Al?
I don't know. You tell me. You're the one who does it.
Um,
Your patients aren't sick generally.
they're not sick. It's a very visual thing, and you are making something beautiful. That is very different from most other forms of medicine. So if you're a cardiologist, you've got ill people, you're trying to figure out, you've got to be clever, you're trying to figure out what drugs they're on, what illnesses they could have. It's all very, like, House.
Yeah.
He's very cerebral, isn't he?
Yeah.
That isn't really me. I'm more of a doer and a visual person. So that's why I love plastic surgery.
But I think, Adrian, that's what differentiates people within our industry, the ones who really super achieve and the ones who rub along. Because I think the eye, and you know this from teaching on your courses, and I know it from when I teach, you can't teach the eye. It's very hard. Whereas I'm sure it's the same when you're doing surgery. I can look at someone's face and think, I know what this is going to look like when I've done what I'm going to do to it. But that's very hard, I think, for a lot of people. I don't think that comes naturally. So I think this profession almost auto-selects us. You either can do it or you can't do it.
Yeah. Do you think you can, so let's say you're not very musical. Can you learn to play an instrument well, although you're not very musical?
I think you can, but it will never come naturally, and there'll always be something slightly missing.
Yeah, so you can't, so I could never be a professional tennis player.
Yeah, but you could play really good tennis, but it will never come naturally.
Exactly. So it's easy, if something comes naturally to you, you should probably in life veer towards things that come naturally to you, because you'll be really good at them. Don't try and do things that you're not very good at.
Yeah. No, do what's easy. Do what comes easily. So you started off then obviously doing, when you qualified as a house officer, what did you then go into? Because that's
so basically, so I did okay at finals, but I had the same problem you had for your GCSEs. Yeah.
Yours probably a bit more important at that point though.
Yeah, maybe. And then so if you were really good, you got a house job at either Thomas's. Half the people got Thomas's. You know where Boris Johnson was looked after?
Yeah.
Just opposite the it's posher than Bart's, actually. Big rivalry, isn't there?
Yeah.
They say about Thomas's people, you can tell them anywhere, but you can't tell them anything.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So you were there.
So Thomas's, for anyone who doesn't know, is super posh. So most of the people there were posh. I was not that posh, and most of my friends tended to be the people from grammar schools or comprehensives. They let a couple in every year just for, basically to look good. Yeah. So most of my friends were those guys rather than the lord and lady, whatever. And then, because I didn't get a job at Thomas's, you had a choice of where to go. You could go to the Medway, Sidcup, all these places in south and east of England. But there was one option which leaped out at me, and it was Jersey.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it leapt out like a beacon. So me and my best friend, who's now a upper GI surgeon in Norfolk, we chose the Jersey option. So basically in Jersey, there you got free accommodation, hardly any tax, and it was party central. So that's where I went for my first house job.
Jersey, doing what?
Surgery. So I did orthopedics and general surgery there. I could tell you stories about that, but I won't go into them now. And anyway, so then I knew I wanted to do surgery. So as you know, when you're a doctor, you either go surgery or a physician in medicine. Went surgery, did all the normal jobs, general surgery, hernias, colorectal, worked at George's, which we could talk about as well. And then basically saw my first plastic surgical operation and knew immediately that's what I wanted to do. And then did all the rotations, went to Australia. I spent a year in New Zealand as well, working as a plastic surgeon. And then went to Australia.
As a medic, how do you do that? At what level? Are you a consultant at that point, or registrar?
No. So basically, you're 18. Well, I was 19 because the year off when I went into medicine. Yeah. Then I did 5 years in medicine. Then you do your house job. So I would be 26, 27, something like that. then you fiddle around doing all the other things for a few years. Then you specialise. So I went to a place called East Grinstead, which is where Archibald Mackinder was. So it's the most famous plastic surgical hospital in the UK. It's where the guinea pigs were. The guinea pigs were the airmen from the Second World War who got the facial burns. So what they used to do is because basically if you haven't got any skin on your face, what you do, you've got to get the skin there, and you can't just plop it on because it would die. So what they used to do is lift some tissue up from the tummy, sew it to the arm, leave it there for 4 weeks, then divide it from the tummy, so blood supply is grown in from the arm, and then attach it to your nose for another 4 weeks, and then the blood supply grows in from your nose. Then you slowly divide it, and you've got an elephant's trunk, which you can remodel. So the airmen were called the guinea pigs. Okay, and basically the rule in East Grinstead was no matter how weird someone looked in the town, you never looked twice, because these were the handsome Spitfire pilots who were completely deformed. And when I was there, they still had a guinea pig ball, so they came back every year.
Word, amazing.
Yeah, and when I was there also, Al, there was a skip. They were clearing out the library, and they were throwing away all these notes. So I went and got them all. So I've got these notes of all these, Air Force people with like little moustaches, all burnt, and all the handwritten notes. Anyway, so that's. But then basically, my boss there, my senior registrar, was from New Zealand. So Mackinder was from New Zealand. It's a very strong heritage in New Zealand for plastic surgery. And he rang me up at 3 o'clock in the morning one day and said, "Can you do the Kiwi accent?"
No, because they probably sound too Australian, and they'll
do it Australian.
Go on, what do you want me to say?
He said basically, "I've got a job for you. Can you come over? Start in 2 weeks."
I've got a job for you, Adrian. Can you come over and start in 2 weeks?
That's very good. That is a very good Kiwi accent, actually.
That'd be great.
And then spent a year in Hamilton. You've ever been to New Zealand?
No, only to Australia.
You've got to travel more, girl. So then Hamilton's in the middle of the North Island.
Yeah.
Where basically no New Zealanders want to go. So I spent a year there, and that was great because you got a lot of practice, all the sheep shearing injuries, all the hand injuries.
Oh, of course. Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and I'll tell you one story. When we were there in the middle of nowhere, we had this Beverly Hills surgeon came out to see us. Yeah. Tall, good looking, loads of gold, and he came to visit our little rubbishy unit in the middle of nowhere, treating, people who mangled their hands from sheep shearing. Yeah. And I never quite realised why he was there. Didn't realise. So why was he there now? Why?
I don't know.
Tell me. Because if you go and visit a unit, it's a tax deductible trip.
Oh, I see. So he was over on holiday and wanted to deduct the tax.
Yeah, and years later it came to me, like, why was he here? And that possibly was the reason, because he wasn't very interested, really.
No, that's fascinating, isn't it? I think those rural places are amazing. Just a quick interjection. My son's now 16, but when he was 3, I was out in Australia visiting my dad in the boondocks, and my son became really ill and became unresponsive. And so we were in this little hospital, and the doctor came and saw us and said, "Oh yeah, he's not great. He's drying out a bit because he was getting dehydrated." And he said, "I'll be back later. I've got to go out to the farms. I'll come back later." So I was like, "Okay, fine." So anyway, came back later, and Barnaby now was really unwell and become unresponsive. So they said, "Oh, we need to get him out of here. We need to airlift him out." So I said, "Okay, fine." And then so they said, "Right, the air ambulance is coming in, but they've got to pick up another baby first, and then they'll come and get you." So the air ambulance comes in, and they say to one of the nurses, "Oh, can you go out and just get the ruse off the landing bit?" Anyway, but then this air ambulance landed to collect us, and it had 2 doctors from Manchester in it who were taking us down to Brisbane. Yeah, 2 doctors from Manchester taking us down.
And you flew down to Brisbane in a helicopter?
I flew down to Brisbane in a helicopter. I was 5 months pregnant with Barnaby. I was on my own because I'd gone out there on my own with Barnaby. Anyway, we were all fine. He was all fine. He just had some weird virus, but he was fine.
I've seen him in pictures. He's a big, strong guy now, isn't he?
Yeah, I know. They grow up fast.
So then you left nursing at 24 and went to work in the pharmaceutical industry. So tell us about that.
So I was a urology sister, and I was working across Barts Hospital and the Royal London. And the thing that nailed my coffin shut in the NHS was two things. Realising, quite ironically, that I couldn't fix it myself. And so that started to annoy me. And secondly, I had a gentleman one day who I had to do a flow rate test on. And this is where essentially you pee in a spinning bucket that's going really fast, and it measures your sort of output. Little Bengali man, you know, really dyed orange hair, no English, no translator, no English. And his son, I said to him, will you translate? And as soon as I mentioned the word penis, his son ran out the room, because I'm this white nurse, so he wouldn't do it. So I'm trying to say to this man, go to the toilet, go to the toilet, go to the toilet. Anyway, several times I leave him, I come back, he's still standing staring at me with this spinning bucket. Finally, I leave him and I've explained it. And then I come back. Oh my God, I walk into what can only be described as a horror program. He finally, when I said, go to the toilet, he emptied his bowels into this spinning cup. So I walked in, the poor man looked terrified. He was covered in whatever. The room was covered in it. Anyway, I walked out the room, and down the corridor was coming these two drug company people. And I said, get me out of this job. And a week later they came to me and said, we've got a job for you. And I was 24. They offered me a company car, expenses, company car, all of that. So I left and I went and worked. I was a drug rep for a very short period of time, and I absolutely it didn't suit me. So then why
didn't you like it?
Because I think the company, looking back, was stupid. They put me, you know, white, middle class in East London. I would go into the GP doctor's surgery, there'd be 5 Indian drug reps sitting there, and then there'd be me. And I just never got sore, and I didn't care about it enough. So I left that, and I tried to resign. They wouldn't let me resign. And so they said, okay, come and work in drug research. That'll probably suit you better. I did that for 5 years. And it didn't really suit. I mean, I did it for 5 years, but I'm more of a big picture thing. I'm not very good at the small things sometimes. So you know, these studies go on for years anyway. And then we were launching a drug that I had been working on, and the marketing manager at the time in the drug company said, come across and launch it with us. And then I flew. Then I had 6 years of managing a sales force, managing a drug, doing sales force motivation. I used to be on stage at big conferences, trying to help with selling techniques and motivation. And so I'd left nursing for about 11 years. So I was in pharma for about 11 years. And then I got a pay rise of 36p a week.
Oh, really?
1 year. Yeah. And I remember going into my boss at the time, and the irony of this now is that my boss at the time now works for Allergan, which is an irony. But anyway, going to my boss at the time and just saying, this doesn't work. And he was like, where it is. So I said, okay, fine. And I was chatting to someone else actually who now works in the industry in the office. And I said, what can I do? I've got a nursing background. I've now run a business, a sales force. I understand all of that. And this chap said, go and retrain, go and do aesthetics. Aesthetics is a booming market. Why don't you retrain? And so that's what I decided. I didn't quite resign, but I had to then do my return to nursing. I had to do my prescribing course. I then had to, so I had about 18 months of re-qualifying while still working in pharma so that I could then set up a new career. Okay. So aesthetics is my third career.
Yeah. And when did you get married in all of this?
When I was 27, I think. I was 23 when I met my husband. So
so where were you? Were you a sister doing Bart?
So I was at Barts then.
Yeah. And so all through this, did you have your children when you were doing aesthetics, or when you were doing the?
No, so I had my son. I had them when I was working in pharma. So I had my son when I was working in pharma, and then I had my daughter when I was working in pharma. But then, yes, because when I was re-qualifying, I used to have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, get the kids in the car, drive them to the childcare, then go out to do my return to nursing course, and then come back. So I had better kids. So it was a really tough, I tell you, it was really tough, because when you do your return to nursing, you have to do 1 day at college or university, and then I was working 3 days still in pharma, and then you have to give back 36 hours a week to the NHS for free.
Wow.
So you did all your sort of traveling. You're off in New Zealand and all of that, and then you
Yeah.
ended up at Stoke Mandeville in Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, so I did a fellowship in Australia. So I was in Melbourne, and I did half hand surgery and half aesthetic surgery. So they set up so plastic surgery in Australia is pretty advanced, more advanced probably than here, actually. So a lot
Why
of
is that?
it's because it's just got, you know, the Australian attitude is basically very practical, get on and do it, and it's not poncy. You know, they've got that fair go. What's fair go?
Yeah, it's that it is, and I think this is where I've got it from. It'll be all right.
Yeah, and fair go means everyone's got a fair chance, everyone has a fair go, and it's sort of the Australian mentality. So, do you know what a free flap is, Al?
No.
Okay, so basically, when the pilots have bad faces, where did you get the skin from?
Stomach.
Yeah, and you had to tube pedicle because the bit between it was tube, so you couldn't leave it flat. You had to make it into a tube.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Anyway, so what they realise now is, so a flap is basically when you move something to somewhere else, but it stays attached. Yeah. So if you break your face, you bring it from here. That's a flap.
Okay.
Okay. Now that's called a pedicle flap because it's attached.
Mm-hmm.
A free flap is basically when you get a bit of tissue and you've got the artery takes blood in and you've got the vein which takes blood out, and it's completely separated from the body. Yeah. And you could basically walk out the room with it.
Right.
And then come back and sew it up, and then it's got blood supply.
Yeah.
So it's a free flap because it was free from the body.
Yes.
Okay. And that is what people mainly do now for breast reconstruction. So someone had a mastectomy, the gold standard treatment is you take tissue from the tummy, which is called a tram flap or a Diep flap. It's a free flap, so you can walk out the room with it, and then you sew it on and you can do whatever you do. So anyway, so the first free flap was performed in Melbourne, Australia. And what had happened at St Vincent's, they had a program. They were investigating it. They're developing all the little instruments for microsurgery. Okay, and the professor there was going to do his first one. Now his registrar was on call, and someone came in on the weekend, and without the professor's knowledge, he did the first ever free flap without the professor's knowledge and publicized it. So he became a global superstar, a bit like Christian Bernard, heart transplant, did the same thing.
Yeah.
And then there was a massive rift in Melbourne, and there are two main plastic surgical units. One started by the Young Pretender, and one started by the So they, because the first free flap was done there, they've got amazing surgical heritage, and they just go for it. Anyway, so a lot of English plastic surgeons go there. I trained in Oxford and Salisbury. That was my rotation in England was after London was Salisbury and Oxford, and then I got a job in Stoke Mandeville, which is the where the spinal unit is, very famous for spinal injuries, and very famous for plastic surgery. And then I worked there for 4 years, and I liked it. But I think, like you, the problem was I wasn't really in control. You know, you might see a patient in clinic, you don't get to do the operation. You do an operation, you never see it. You know, it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And the moment, you know, your moment with the Bengali guy, mine was, I used to go to these meetings every week, and basically nowadays when I go to a meeting, there's actions and things happen. We decide something. Those meetings, nothing ever happened. I'd sit there for 2 hours. They were all taught, nothing ever happened. Yeah. But on the positive side, we had nice sandwiches.
Probably provided by a drug rep.
Probably. So I used to just basically look at the sandwiches and think, you know, which one shall I have next? You know, I've had 4. Is 5 too many? Yeah. And then brilliant. And then think of my strategy for getting the sandwich without being too picky. See what I mean? And then when they stopped the sandwiches, basically, I thought that is a sign I need.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Sandwiches being stopped. But I think it's interesting, Adrian, because I've noticed with this working with you recently, and I just think it's brilliant, is that you always put call to actions in place. And that's what has to have led you onto Aurora cosmetic courses, because you do things, you make things happen. But I believe there are, in this world, there's passengers and there's drivers, and that's it. And you're either one or the other. And I think the drivers in this world are the ones like you, who's done this sort of, Aurora and cosmetic courses and done all of that. I remember, I was telling you this, I remember years ago when I'd first opened my first clinic and I was writing the website about sort of midnight. And I remember my husband sort of saying to me, come on, it's midnight. Why are you writing the website now? Yeah. And I was like, do you think Richard Branson stopped at 5 o'clock each day? And now I'm not Richard Branson, but I do think it's a certain character in there.
It is, but you can't all be drivers. If everyone's a driver,
not at all.
And the thing, my family think I'm a bit annoying, I think, sometimes, because I'm always
driving.
Yeah, always getting to try and do something. And do you know Morecambe and Wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a heart attack, and I remember reading about him. He was ill at home, and his kids said he was pretty annoying because they would just be chilling out, and he'd be popping up behind a bush, which is great for an hour program. When you live with it, it's probably a little bit. Yeah.
And the problem also they say about being driven is if you are driven, you never arrive.
That's right. So, and I think I've got better at that actually, but as I've got older. Yeah. But anyway, so back to you. So then you started, because we've got to move on, we could talk all day.
I know, we have.
So, and then the Glasshouse. So tell me about your career in aesthetics.
So I qualified, I did my courses and everything like that. And then I didn't have any patients. I didn't know what to do. So I went and got a job for the hospital group in town, and it was brilliant. It was stack 'em high, do it quick. So I really cut my teeth quickly learning Botox fillers. But after a period of time, when I realized how well I was doing for them, I began to think, hang on a second, I should be doing this for myself. And so back in October 2009, I think it was, or 2008, I woke up one morning, put the kids in the pushchair because they were little at the time, walked down the road near me and just looked for commercial units. And I rang up this Bell's commercial who do the commercial. There was this one site and he said, let's have a look at it. This was at lunchtime. By 3:30 in the afternoon, I'd agreed the rent and signed the lease.
That was the first Glass House. That was the first
Glass House. And then on the Monday, Lehman's Bank crashed.
Yeah.
And, our industry is built on bankers' wives, or where I am and all of this kind of thing. So I just decided there's no point watching the news or reading a newspaper because I can't impact it. And I have now signed a lease. So I stopped watching the news, stopped reading any newspapers. I didn't listen to anything until I opened my door on March the 1st because I couldn't do anything else. I've got a lease now, so I had to make it work.
And how has it worked since then? What's been your... How many years ago was that, Al?
That was 11 years ago now. Started off, I always say, I started off with one vial of Botox and a lot of hope. I really did. And it's amazing. Now I've got 2 clinics. There's 10 of us, 10 staff now. We have 3 cool sculpt machines. We do everything from all non-surgical, essentially. In 2015, 2016, I think it was, they did some research on us, and we were the highest netting patient per month for a clinic of our size. We've just really delivered what the patients want, I think. So we've now, and then 2 years ago, I'm not sure I planned these things necessarily. 2 years ago, I went to Wimbledon Village, which is beautiful, incredibly chic, incredibly expensive. Simon Cowell lives there, Anthony Deck, everyone lives there. And I walked around and I saw Tox Tiles was available and in prime location. And I said, okay, we'll have another clinic. And because clinics in London, patients don't tend to travel more than 3.5 miles. So, and Wimbledon's 3.6 miles away. So the 2 clinics now, they're exactly the same. They're both called the Glasshouse, and we now run across the site. And we've now got, that's growing really well as well. So it's just been a success.
Yeah. So, you've been a brilliant success. And rather annoyingly, you won the award when we didn't.
Yes, this year. I know, this year. Yeah, but it's probably about time I won one. I don't think I'd won one for a couple of years. So it's probably about time that we had won one.
Yeah. So that was the aesthetic awards, and we were both up.
Yeah.
Cosmetic Courses was up for an award, and Glasshouse
Yeah.
was up. And we were put in a nice table. So normally when you're in a table near the front, you know,
we weren't.
You were in a rubbish table.
I know,
and,
we were at the cheap seats.
I know. And then up you went on the podium and won your award. So there you go.
I know.
Okay. So that's got you to sort of present day. So I was a consultant in Stoke Mandeville, finding it very difficult to do both, had a private practice and then built the private practice up. And then took on partners, essentially. So we grew up to about 5 surgeons. We called it Aurora Clinics.
Yeah,
that was our name. Started a YouTube channel. So one of the first people to do, I used to edit little YouTube videos on my own operations. And that's had, I think, 30 million views. So you see me, no grey hair if you look back. Yeah, 30 million people have watched that around the world. Anyway, and then we sold Aurora Clinics because it was, you know, it was surgery, and the private clinic were looking to add surgery to their portfolio. The private clinic, one of the biggest companies in the UK, they basically bought us, and now I work with my surgery is via the private clinic. My brother-in-law Jim basically is the businessman. So So I say, you know, it's like have you ever seen Are You Being Served? Are you too young? Yeah, I'm like young Mr. Grace.
Yes,
just wheeled in, you know. So I'm more. So we also had another company called Cosmetic Courses, which I set up years ago, back in 2001, and that's now the biggest non-surgical training company in the UK. We're looking to expand internationally. So Jim does all the businessy side, whereas I tend to do the more marketing and more, the more patient focused side. Yeah. So I'll be the one who stays up late at meetings. So he goes, "Oh, you never meet anyone after 11 o'clock at night, and no point. You need to get to bed." But I've met some of the most interesting people after 11 o'clock anyway. Yeah. Yeah,
because the most interesting people tend to stay up. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's where we are now.
So there's that real business side of you, which is quite unique. I think lots of people are just surgeons and kind of they trot along. So, but now, do you just do breast surgery, or do you do other plastic surgery?
So I think I'm either the first or second plastic surgeon in the UK who set up a business which has successfully sold. I think there's one other one who did it, but none of my peers have at the moment. What I liked about it is we had a lot of staff. So Aurora, I'm not a very good manager. You might be, Al, but I'm. You know, the HR, all the small print things, the insurance, it's just not me at all. No. So I think when Jim came on board, he's brilliant at all that stuff. So it's a good partnership. So I used to do a lot of facelifts and things, but generally with plastic surgeons, you tend to. So in the old days, surgeons used to do everything.
Yeah.
And now we move. So most surgeons. So if you're an upper GI surgeon, you do gallbladders and stomachs. That's it. So I've moved. I don't do facelift or blepharoplasties or ears anymore. I just basically do breast surgery. And funnily enough, Al, when I was in Australia, there was a plastic surgeon colleague of mine, and he said that he wanted to give up doing facelifts. So what he did is he doubled his price from 10,000 US dollars, Australian dollars to 20. So no one's ever going to come. What happened?
They all came.
So, and I have a friend in London, a very good friend of mine. He regularly has his team ring up to make sure that he is the most expensive surgeon for a breast augmentation in London.
Oh, really?
So that's where I am. So we have a training course now. So, you know, do the training, and I do surgery, but I'm probably not going to be, you know, I'm probably cutting down the surgery a bit. And my signature operation is what I call an auto augmentation. So that is a technique I've developed now so if anyone has had breast implants for a long time, 20 years ago, we've got a technique where I can take the implants out and use their own tissue, basically fold it in to take the place of where the implant was. Does that make sense, to maintain shape?
Wow.
So that's the operation I sort of So basically, lots of other surgeons have got elements of it, but I put it together, and that's the operation I tend to do most.
And how many surgical operations do you do a year?
Oh, well, that's an interesting point, because I've been doing the Instagram lives with people. So so some surgeons, so Mario Luke, who I talked to yesterday, he says he does 600 to 700 a year. Now, so there's obviously minor operations. So minor operations, split earlobe, you don't count those, or you count them as half an operation maybe. But a breast augmentation or above, basically, I try and probably do about 300 to 400. Some surgeons, if they're working every day flat out, might do 800, 900.
Where's the pleasure in that?
Well, you just kill yourself.
Financially, probably, but otherwise, it just then becomes, you lose the love if you're just banging through patients.
That's true. But a problem is, Al, if people ask if you're wanted, how do you deal with that?
I don't very well, and that's what I have to change, actually, because I inject too much, I work too much, and that's what's been really, I said this to you for the first time ever, doing something like this it's just so refreshing, because otherwise it's really hard to turn it down when you've got someone who wants to pay you to do whatever.
Exactly. So my thing is, I call myself a professional plumber. Okay, so a plumber goes in, he fixes something, he gets paid. So we do the same thing essentially. Okay. But most of my surgical colleagues have not built them. They've got nothing to sell.
Yes.
No. So you've built up a business as well, a very successful business, in your area. And I built up 2 successful businesses, one of which we still own. So, but the problem is so all the surgeons I'm interviewing, a lot of them are saying they've sort of become a victim of their own success.
Yes. Because it's really,
So I've got to, and I think for the patients as well, it's better to treat fewer patients really well than treat everyone. And it's better for your mental health as well.
I think you're right. And I think the thing we have to do, which is I'm really trying to do, because ultimately my plan is to sell, similar sort of thing, is, yes, I am Alison Telfer at the Glasshouse, but with the staff, it has to be, we do get some patients now, which I think is brilliant, who ring up and they might want an appointment, and the reception team might say, oh, I'm afraid Alison's not free. And they go, oh, no, that doesn't matter. I just want to see someone there. Because now the Glasshouse has a nice reputation. So it doesn't sit on me. And that's what I think is a challenge for us. But if you want to let go of your business eventually, but still benefit, you've got to do that.
Yeah. If you love it, you've got to let it go.
Yeah, you have. Are you going to let me go now, as you can slow?
So don't go yet. So Al, just before we go, just refresh everyone's mind about the podcast.
So the podcast is Plastic Fantastic, and I think we'll be fine when we do it, because we won't be interviewing 2 people. We've kind of interviewed 2 people, so we'll be fine when we do it. Plastic Fantastic, we're going to be drilling down, getting underneath sort of people's skin, finding out who they are, what their experience has been of the industry, how they perhaps affect the industry, or how they've been touched by the industry. And we are lining up a real mix of people to interview, from your very top surgeon to someone who's perhaps spending thousands on it trying to change their appearance completely. And hopefully we'll be able to get some really interesting guests along the way. Brilliant.
So Al, thank you very much for your time today. And
thank you, Adrian.
Guys, listen out for the podcast. First episode coming soon. It won't be me and Alison talking so much. We're going to be focusing on the guest, aren't we?
Yes, exactly. We certainly are. And it's the first one in the UK to be doing it like this, with our sort of alliances married. So hopefully we'll get plenty of support from all our industry colleagues.
Al, have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks.